Sawadee Cup viewers. Today's story is from subscriber Sven from Sweden, of a man he heard about through friends called Anders. Warning, it does contain a tragic ending. Here is Sven's story. Anders was from southern Sweden, and at the time this story begins, in 1991, he was in his late 40s. He was a simple man, a man with a simple life. He had lived at home with his mother in their small house until she passed away some years earlier, and he had inherited the house, which he kept on living in on his own. We don't know much about his schooling, but he probably never went beyond the 7th grade, which would have been the minimum mandatory schooling in the days of his youth. We do know that he had worked construction all his adult life. He was one of the very most basic workers, just a man with a shovel, and he seemed to have no interest in changing this. Anders was a creature of habit. He would bring his lunchbox to work containing 2 sandwiches with cheese and 2 with ham and sliced cucumber on top. The same every day, all week, all year. He'd eat 1 of each for breakfast at 9 o'clock and the remaining 1 of each for lunch at 12 o'clock. In the evening, he'd eat hot dogs. If the weather permitted it, he'd fire up his charcoal grill and grill his hot dogs outside. Otherwise, he'd broil them in a pan in his kitchen. He'd eat 5 or 6 hot dogs with bread and ketchup and mustard every day, all week, all year. Every Friday on his way home from work, Anders would buy a plate of beers at the state-operated liquor store Monopoly, Systembolaget. He'd buy the same brand every time and he'd drink 12 beers, 33 centiliter cans on Friday evening and the remaining 12 on Saturday evening every weekend. If the weather was nice, he'd sit outside and listen to the radio or sometimes talk to the occasional visitor. If the weather was bad, he'd drink his beer in front of the TV inside his house. Anders was appreciated by his colleagues at work and by the management of the construction company. He was always at work on time, he never called in sick, he always worked hard, and he never complained. He was dependable, and he did the kind of jobs most saw themselves in only temporarily. You don't build a company on men such as Anders, but every good employer knows to quietly appreciate those who do the grunt work and are content with it. But another factor was certainly the banking crisis that hit Sweden like a nuclear bomb in late 1991. This banking crisis, much like the global one we face today, froze up credit from the banks and plunged the Swedish economy into a deep recession. Perhaps no sector felt the shock more dramatically than the overheated construction sector, where orders for new construction simply vanished from one day to the next. For the first time in his life, Anders faced an uncertain future. Union regulation prevented the company from cutting hours of employees or from reducing their hourly salary. Layoffs were a possibility, but with his many years working for the company, Anders was well shielded as the last and first out principle applied. What his company could do and what they did was to force him to use his accumulated vacation time. The thought, of course, was that they wanted their employees to use up their vacation time during the winter and hoped to have secured new contracts by summer. Instead of the employees idling around with nothing to do all winter and then taking vacation in the summertime when there might be work to be done. A sensible approach, one must agree. So this is how Anders suddenly found himself with 3 weeks of forced vacation time in February. The vacation time he had earned since his last summer vacation in July, but that he hadn't planned to use until next July as per usual. These events, plus, I assume, The lure of Victor's stories was what possessed Anders to book that flight to Thailand that February in 1992. It was to prove a monumental decision, one changing his life forever. The destination was Koh Samui, an island in the south of Thailand. Victor had lived there for extended periods before, interrupted only when his cash ran out and reality hit him square in the face. He had had his problems and lived an unstable life that most would not have endured. He was, as he is today, a functioning alcoholic. By this, I mean that he definitely had a big alcohol problem, but that he managed to function socially and could even straighten up when forced to, and function work-wise. He got into trouble with money, lending or borrowing them, and he got into trouble with women. But Victor was also a happy-go-lucky survivor type of guy, friendly and charming, and a genuinely kind person. Despite his many flaws, he was, and still is today, an easy person to like. But he was perhaps not the best guide and mentor Anders could have used in Thailand. I've not been told how Anders got to Koh Samui. I assume he flew to Bangkok and managed to get on from there. Perhaps he had a ticket already booked, or perhaps he managed this himself. I know he did it alone, as I know Victor was already there when he arrived. This must have been some adventure for someone who'd never been out of his own country before, except for a few short visits to neighbouring Denmark. What a contrast it must have been with Thailand compared to the dark Scandinavian winter he'd just come from. I picture him amazed and wide-eyed, especially upon landing on Koh Samui's small airport with its straw-roofed airport buildings and its many palm trees and its little runways and cho-cho train-like baggage carts. Anders got to Choweng Beach and met up with Victor, who took it upon himself to show him around. Victor got him a nice bungalow close to the beach. They went down to the beach to have a look at the sea and to have an afternoon beer or two. They went to dinner that evening, and then they went to Victor's favourite bar for drinks. It was here, on his very first night in Thailand, that Anders met Sudarat. Perhaps if he hadn't met her, his story would have ended very differently. Or perhaps he then would have met someone else just like her, and the end result would have been much the same. The latter is what I believe, but we'll never know. Sudarat claimed to be 35 years old, but Victor says she was more likely around 45. She was more a bartender than a bar girl, due to her age and due to the fact that Samui drew mostly young backpackers back then, and therefore had few potential bar girl customers to begin with, and fewer still who would go with a woman of Sudarat's age. Not that Sudarat was old and ugly, she wasn't. She was a bit rounded but had a shapely body. She had long black hair, a feminine face with almond eyes, and a bright smile, and she had a capturing personality. She captured the attention of Anders as soon as he laid eyes on her. The first Thai woman to sit down and talk to him, and he was caught like a fish on a barbed hook straight away. And then she reeled him in. Anders, being the creature of habit that he was, immediately settled into a daily routine. He would wake up, have breakfast, and then visit the beach for a few hours. He would then go back, wake up Sudarat, and go have lunch with her. After lunch, about the time Victor would wake from his slumber, Anders would be ready for an early afternoon beer, and Victor was equally ready for his breakfast beer, so they'd go have a beer or a few. In the evening, Anders would sit in Sudarat's bar on the same chair every evening and drink. Sudarat would lavish attention on him. She would play Connect 4 or dice games with him. She would wipe his neck with a cold towel if he was warm, and she would talk and laugh with him. And later, in the night, she would go home with him and share his bed. Now this, I suppose, must have been an even bigger contrast to his regular life than coming from the dark, cold Scandinavia and arriving in tropical Koh Samui, trading coal frost for warm sand. To be coming from a life of perpetual solitude and finding himself in the warm embrace of an exotic woman who, and there can be no doubt about this, expressed her deep and undying love for him, must have been an even more resounding change. This must have fundamentally changed Anders as a person and as a man. And as subsequent events will show, he was indeed a changed man. What we do know was that Anders settled into his new life in Samui and soon got himself into trouble. Many refer to troublesome times in their lives as a roller coaster ride they went on, meaning that their fortunes went up and down with sudden jerks and twists. Now, a roller coaster may twist and turn and move with blistering speed, but it ends at the same level it started. Anders' life in Samui turned out more like a bobsleigh ride. He started at the top and just went downhill with increasing speed. It was the house he bought with Sudarat. Of course he went straight back to her, and of course she was happy to see him. Of course he wanted to impress her with his new plan for his life, and of course she wanted to be there and share his riches, or to get her fair share of his riches, fair being as much as possible. So a house was promptly bought for the lucky couple to reside in. It was bought from a relative of Sudarat, and Sudarat's name was on the deed. It moved on with the boat. Oh man, the boat. Anders, having only ever worked with the most basic tasks, suddenly thought himself an entrepreneur. His grand plan was to buy a speedboat and take tourists out with it. What a plan! How could it go wrong? For starters, he bought the boat from some Thai guy in Phuket and planned to have it sent over to Samui. Well, first they screwed him on the price. Then they screwed him for trucking and shipping costs to get it sent over, which he thought was agreed that they would do in the initial price. Then the boat that did arrive did so without engines and without a lot of the necessary electronic equipment. All in all, he paid a terribly inflated price for a boat's hull that sat on a trailer. Now these, the house and the boat, were the two main drains on Anders' finances, as far as we know, and the boat debacle was a process that lasted the best part of a year. But during this time and after, he had many people's hands in his pockets fishing for smaller sums. A motorbike was needed by Sudarat, and she had endless requests for spending money. Fellow Farang on the source found a drinking buddy that could be trusted to be left with the check bin at the end of the night. A loan here and a gift there, it added up. Anders' progressive alcohol problem did not help matters. He didn't just drink on weekends anymore, far from it. In Thailand, he drank daily and more and more. Gone were the visits to the beach and most other activities outside the bars and taverns, and gone were the early mornings and relaxing afternoons. In their place, the routine of a full-fledged alcoholic materialized. Wake, drink, 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 pass out at night. The speedboat never even entered the waters of Samui. It never even became a speedboat. It remained on its trailer. Anders' attempts to revoke the deal were unsuccessful. His attempts were only ever limited to him pleading, but he was, of course, pleading in vain. His lame attempts at fixing up the boat never bore fruit. He was simply not able to sort out buying engines and equipment and installing it or paying to have it done. In all likelihood, he was better off not trying too hard, as he would probably just have gotten ripped off some more. Anders became increasingly dissatisfied with his situation and increasingly spiteful at those he perceived to be at fault. He was always an optimist before and had such high hopes now that he was to live in his version of paradise. When he finally realized his dream was cracking, he started blaming others. He cut off the money flow, and people who had seemed his friends suddenly wanted nothing to do with him. He grew bitter and withdrew within himself. Sudarat got sick of him, or perhaps she realized the golden goose had lain all the eggs it was to ever lay. Whatever her reasons might have been, she kicked him out of her house. And as everyone but Anders knew already, it was indeed her house. So out he went. He moved into a shack and sought comfort in the bottle. He had already moved from beer to whiskey, and he started hitting the booze hard. He had some sort of accident where he cut his foot up, and the sore was badly infected. He eventually managed to get rid of the infection after several visits to some local quack, but he was left with a swollen foot and a permanent limp. Victor saw him from time to time during these last months. He had tried to help out, but he never really managed. Victor was rarely sober himself and had enough of a problem taking care of himself, let alone someone else. He saw where Anders was headed, and he felt bad about it, but was unable to do much to change things. He was the one person Anders still regarded as a friend at this stage, a flickering light in the growing darkness. Anders had been a simple man who had had a life. It was perhaps not a big life in the eyes of the world, but it was a life he was content with. He had a job that provided for him a home and a familiar routine. He had a sense of belonging in his small community, but he saw a vision of paradise in Thailand, fueled by Victor's tales and perhaps a longing for something more. And he made a dramatic impulse decision to chase that dream. What he went for was an illusion, a fantasy that shattered against the harsh realities of a world he didn't understand. Thailand, instead of being a paradise, became the place where his life unraveled. It took less than 2 years for his savings to vanish, his relationships to crumble, and his health to deteriorate. In the end, there was nothing left of Anders but a shadow of his former self. He was destitute and malnourished, his body weakened by alcohol and neglect. His passport, a symbol of his connection to home, had been lost, leaving him stranded and isolated. He had no return ticket and, tragically, nothing to return to. Having severed all ties, he was left with nothing but the bitter taste of broken hopes and shattered dreams. Now, Koh Samui at that time wasn't as developed as it is today. Even today, it retains a more laid-back atmosphere than some of the tourist hotspots, and back then it was even more so. There wasn't the kind of infrastructure or support systems that might exist in larger, more established expat communities. In his final act of despair, in the spring of 1994, sometime around Songkran, Anders' journey reached its tragic conclusion. He succumbed to the overwhelming weight of his circumstances, a stark reminder of how quickly dreams can turn into nightmares when not grounded in reality and understanding. Anders' story serves as a poignant warning. It highlights the dangers of impulsive decisions, the allure of the unknown, and the potential for cultural misunderstandings and exploitation. It underscores the importance of maintaining connections to home, making informed choices, and recognizing that true happiness and belonging are not always found in distant lands or fleeting fantasies. His tale is a sad testament to how a simple life, though perhaps perceived as ordinary, can offer a stability and security that is easily lost when chasing an idealized and ultimately unattainable vision. If you are affected by this story, details of an organization that can help are in the comments. Please like the video, leave a comment below, and subscribe to the channel for more tales of Thailand.